The message came at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Hamilton, wrapping the last of the sea glass I'd spent 3 months collecting from the shores of Lake Ontario. I had planned to give each piece to my grandchildren on the beach, one for each of them, tucked inside a little cloth pouch I'd hand-stitched myself. My phone buzzed. It was from my daughter. "Mom, we need to talk about Tofino. My husband and I have been thinking, and honestly, we feel like this trip needs to be just us and the kids. You know how you get emotional about Dad, and we don't want that energy around the children for a whole week. You've already done so much organizing. We think it's best if you sit this one out. We'll send photos." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table and looked at the small pile of sea glass in front of me. Green, brown, milky white, each piece smoothed by years of water and time, worn down to something gentler than it started as. My husband would have found something philosophical to say about that. He always did. I had been planning this trip for 2.5 years. Since the week after he died, actually, when I was sitting in our living room, surrounded by sympathy cards, I couldn't bring myself to open. And I thought, he wanted to see the Pacific Ocean. He talked about it every summer. He'd grown up in Sudbury, spent his whole life in Ontario, and every year he'd say, "One day we go west. One day, I promise." We never made it. We always had reasons. The kids were small. Then they were in school, then university, then there were grandchildren, then there was the surgery, and then there was no more one day. So I decided I would take the whole family to Tofino on Vancouver Island. I would bring part of his ashes. He'd told our daughter years before that he wanted them scattered in the ocean. And we would stand at the edge of the Pacific together. We would do the thing he never got to do. I opened a TFSA that winter, separate from my pension, separate from everything else. I was 66 years old, retired from 31 years of nursing, and I had never once spent money on myself without feeling like I was taking it from someone else. So I started small. $50 a month became $100, then $150, when I picked up 2 shifts at the hospital auxiliary thrift shop. I canceled my satellite package. I stopped buying the good tea and switched to the store brand. When my neighbor Rhonda asked why I seemed to be eating at home every time she knocked, I told her I was just watching my budget. She didn't know I was watching it the way you watch a garden, slowly, deliberately, waiting for something to grow. 22 months in, I had just over $14,000. I found the property on a vacation rental site. A 3-bedroom house above Long Beach in Tofino, decks on every level, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking straight out at the Pacific. It slept 9. It cost $4,800 for 7 nights. I booked it with my visa linked to my TFSA, my name, my card, my booking confirmation sent to my email address alone. I called a travel agent downtown, a woman I'd known for years through the church fundraiser committee, and she helped me book 8 seats on WestJet out of Pearson. 8 tickets from Toronto to Vancouver, then the small regional hop to Tofino. 8 seats. My daughter, my son-in-law, their 2 children, my son and his girlfriend, my youngest granddaughter who lives with my son, and me. I printed everything and kept it in a folder in the kitchen drawer. Confirmation numbers. Check-in times. The name of the surf school that did lessons for kids. The number of the restaurant on the waterfront that my husband had read about in a magazine years ago and left a bookmark in, though he'd never been within 3,000 kilometers of it. I was going to bring that magazine. I was going to order whatever he had folded the page to. I should have noticed sooner that something was shifting. My daughter started hosting Sunday dinners at her in-laws more often than ours. She said they had more space. She wasn't wrong, they had a larger house. But I was always the last to hear about it. Sometimes Saturday evening, sometimes the morning of. Once I arrived with a pot of soup, and they'd already ordered pizza. My daughter laughed and said I shouldn't have bothered. I stood in her kitchen, holding a pot of chicken stock, and smiled like it was nothing. My son-in-law had always treated me with the kind of politeness people use when they find someone tolerable, but not particularly interesting. He remembered to ask after my health, and then immediately turned to speak to someone else. I had learned not to take it personally, but over the past year I noticed he'd begun speaking about the trip in ways that made me feel like a footnote in my own plan. Our Tofino trip, he would say, our beach house. At Christmas, he told his mother, "We've got this amazing place booked on the island. Not my mother-in-law organized this. Not she's been saving for 2 years. Just we." Still, I said nothing. I kept adding to the TFSA, I hoped. Then that Tuesday night text came, and something in me went very still. I did not reply right away. I made chamomile tea, which I normally only drink when I cannot sleep, and I sat with it until the mug was empty. Then I opened my laptop. I went to the vacation rental site. My name was still at the top. Reservation holder. I scrolled through the details. Check-in, July 12. Check-out, July 19. Primary card on file. My TFSA visa. I was the only authorized user, no co-holder, no secondary contact, no shared access. I sat with that for a long time. Then I opened my email and searched for the WestJet confirmations. All 8 tickets were there, referencing the same booking number I had created under my own frequent flyer account. The payment had come from my card. The contact for any changes or cancellations was my address. I am the account holder, I thought, the only one. I did not do anything that night. I needed to be sure, not angry sure, but clear sure, the kind of certain that doesn't shake when someone pushes back. I gave my daughter 4 days. I sent one message the morning after her text, careful and quiet. "I'd like to talk when you have a moment. There may be some booking details we need to sort through." She replied 2 days later, "We're really slammed right now. Can it wait until next week?" Next week would have been 6 days before our flight. I waited, she did not call. On the 5th day, I went to the vacation rental website and I canceled the booking. I had deliberately chosen a flexible cancellation policy when I first booked. One of the many small, careful things I'd done when I organized every piece of this trip. Within 24 hours, $4,800 returned to my TFSA. Then I called WestJet. I explained that I was the account holder, that the tickets had been booked under my frequent flyer number, and I asked about the cancellation terms. 3 of the 8 tickets were fully refundable, mine, and 2 others I'd booked on the same flexible fare. The remaining 5 could be converted to travel credits in my name, valid for 24 months. The woman on the phone was patient and kind. I thanked her twice. I did not tell my daughter what I had done. I put the kettle on and waited. The morning of the flight, I was sitting in my backyard with a mug of tea and a library book I had been meaning to start for 3 months. My phone began ringing at 7:22 a.m. It was my daughter. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Then my son-in-law called. Then my daughter 3 times in a row. Then a text. "Mom, there's some issue with the house booking." The website is saying the reservation doesn't exist. Please call us right now. We're at the airport. Then, Mom, seriously, the kids are here. We already checked our bags. Then my son-in-law, I don't know what happened, but the Tofino rental has been canceled. Please call as soon as you see this. This is urgent. I read every message. I set the phone face down on the arm of my garden chair. A robin landed on the fence post nearby and sat there looking at me with one bright eye, unbothered by any of it. I did not call. What I felt in that moment was not triumph. It was not anger either, which surprised me. It was something closer to the quiet that comes after you've been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and have finally set it down in the right place. Not dropped, set down, on purpose, with your hands steady. My daughter left a voicemail I listened to that evening when the calls finally stopped. Her voice was tight and controlled in the way it gets when she is trying not to cry and trying not to shout at the same time. She said there must have been a mistake. She said she didn't understand. She said the kids were devastated. She said she hoped I hadn't done this on purpose. She said she needed me to call her back. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say, I was wrong to tell you to stay home. She did not say, you deserved to be there. She did not say, Dad would have wanted you there. I played the voicemail once, then I deleted it. That night I opened my spiral notebook, the one I'd had for years, used for grocery lists and things I needed to remember, and I turned to a blank page near the back. I wrote 5 names across the top. Rhonda, who had been my next-door neighbor for 14 years and whose children hadn't visited since before the pandemic. Who had appeared at my door with a casserole the week my husband died and said simply, You don't have to talk. I'll just sit. Who had never, in all the years I'd known her, taken a holiday that wasn't a bus trip to Niagara Falls. Georgina, who I'd met in a grief support group 2 winters ago. She'd lost her husband 6 months before I lost mine. We met for coffee every few weeks at a diner near the GO station and talked about how strange it was to cook for one person now and how nobody ever warned you that one of the loneliest parts of being widowed was having opinions with no one to share them with. Shirley, from my Tuesday morning walking group, 73 years old, still sharp as anything, who had cared for her sister with mobility issues for 8 years without once complaining, and who told me once that she had never seen the ocean. Either ocean. She'd grown up on the prairies, stayed in Ontario for her marriage, and the water she'd known her whole life was the Great Lakes. Doreen, who ran the community garden 3 blocks from my house and grew the best tomatoes I had ever tasted, and who had been gradually forgotten by her adult children in the way that happens slowly, and then all at once. Fewer phone calls, fewer visits. Eventually, a birthday that passed without a card. And Rita, who I had known since our children were in primary school together, who had given up her own teaching career to raise her grandchildren when her son couldn't manage, who never asked for anything back, who had told me once, over wine at my kitchen table, I don't even know who I am when I'm not needed by someone. Isn't that terrible? I had told her it wasn't terrible. It was just what happened when you spent too long being useful to people who assumed you always would be. I made 5 phone calls the next morning. Rhonda laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine surprise. You're joking, she said. Tofino? That Tofino? With the big waves? That's the one, I said. But why me? Because you brought me a casserole when I couldn't stand up straight, I said. And because you've never seen the Pacific. And because you should. A pause, then, okay, yes, I'm coming. All 5 of them said yes. I rebooked in Tofino, a different house, slightly smaller, right on the beach. 5 bedrooms, a wraparound deck, a fire pit facing the water. I booked it under my name on my card, with my email as the only contact. I used the refund from the first booking and a portion of the WestJet travel credits to cover flights for everyone. Whatever gaps remained, I covered from my savings. I had spent 2.5 years saving for a trip that was meant to bring my family back together. Now I was spending it on the people who had actually shown up when I needed them. It felt less like a consolation and more like a correction. We landed in Vancouver on a cloudy Friday afternoon and took the small regional flight to Tofino as the sun started to break through. When the wheels touched down and Shirley looked out the window at the low green mountains and the silver-gray water stretching out below, she made a sound I had only ever heard people make in church. Low and involuntary, like something had moved through her without asking permission. "That's it," I told her. "That's the Pacific." She pressed her hand against the window and didn't say anything else for a long while. At the house, I unpacked slowly. I took out the things I had always planned to bring. My husband's photograph, the one from our holiday in PEI 20 years ago, him standing on the red sand with his hands in his pockets and his eyes half closed against the wind, laughing at something I'd said that I can no longer remember, and the small cedar box holding part of his ashes, which I had carried in my carry-on in a padded pouch, declared at customs the way you're supposed to, the way I'd researched 3 times to make sure I did it right. I set the photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. Nobody asked me to move it. That first evening, I made fish chowder from a recipe he had clipped from a magazine years ago. The same magazine with the folded page for the Tofino restaurant we never made it to. I'd called ahead. The restaurant had closed during the pandemic. So instead we ate at the house, around a table that fit all 6 of us, with room to spare, candles lit, rain beginning to tap against the deck windows. Doreen told a story about the time she accidentally entered her tomatoes in the wrong category at the county fair and still won 2nd place. We laughed until Georgina had to put down her wine glass. Rita talked about her grandchildren, not with the careful, exhausted pride she usually wore when she spoke about them, but with something warmer, the way you talk about people when you are not also overworked and running on empty and quietly afraid of being discarded once you stop being useful. Shirley told us about the prairies, about standing in a field so flat you could see a storm coming from 3 provinces away, and how that kind of sky made you feel very small in a way that was, strangely, a comfort. Rhonda was quiet through most of dinner. Afterward, when the others had moved to the living room and I was clearing the table, she came and stood beside me. "I just want you to know," she said, "that I haven't felt like a full person in a very long time, and tonight I did." I set down the dish I was holding and looked at her. "Me too," I said. On the 3rd morning, I woke before everyone else and walked down to the beach. The tide was out, the sand was dark and wet, and the waves were long and unhurried, rolling in without urgency, like they had nowhere else to be. I carried the cedar box in both hands. I had thought I might cry. I had braced myself for it, the way you do when you know something is coming that will undo you a little. But standing there at the edge of the water with the cold Pacific touching my rubber boots, I didn't cry. I felt something steadier, something that had been waiting patiently for a long time to finally be felt. "You wanted to see this," I said quietly, "so here we are." I opened the box. The wind took most of it gently, out over the water. I stood there until the tide came in enough to reach my boot tips. Then, I walked back up the beach toward the house where I could already see lights on in the kitchen and smell Rhonda making coffee. 3 days after I returned home to Hamilton, an email arrived from my daughter. The subject line said, "Can we talk?" I opened it. She wrote that she'd been doing a lot of reflecting. She wrote that she recognized some of what she'd said had been hurtful. She wrote that my son-in-law had pointed out the situation could have been handled better, as though the error had been procedural, a miscommunication, a thing to be handled rather than a wound she'd made deliberately. She wrote that the kids had been disappointed about the trip. She wrote that she'd like to find a way forward as a family. Then, in the second-to-last paragraph, she wrote that she and my son-in-law were trying to sort out some unexpected costs from the travel disruption. Hotels they'd had to book last minute, flights they'd rebooked on points redeemed at short notice. And she asked whether, if I was willing, I might consider helping cover some of those expenses. She said she wasn't asking for everything. Just whatever I felt was fair. I read the email twice. Then a third time, more slowly, looking for the part where she said she had been wrong to tell me I was not welcome. Looking for the sentence that used the words "I am sorry" or "I should never have sent that text," or even just "I understand why you did what you did." Looking for anything that was not a negotiation. There was nothing. I closed the email. I did not reply that day, or the next, or the one after. Eventually, I understood that there was nothing useful left to say, and that saying nothing was not the same as giving up. It was simply choosing not to spend any more of myself on a conversation that only moved in one direction. What I did instead was go to Rhonda's house for dinner. She made roast chicken, and we ate at her small table and talked about whether we should start a book club, just the two of us, or whether we should ask Georgina too. We decided to invite Georgina. And then, because why not, Shirley and Doreen and Rita as well. We met the following Tuesday. It turned out that Shirley had very strong opinions about novels. She'd been quietly furious about a particular ending for 11 years. And that Georgina could summarize any book in exactly 4 sentences, no more, no less, which the rest of us found inexplicably comforting. Rita brought butter tarts she'd made herself. Doreen brought wine. I had not felt that warm in years. I don't know what will happen with my daughter. I have not closed the door on the conversation, only on the particular version where I explain why I deserved better, and she explains why she doesn't quite owe me an apology. That conversation has nowhere useful to go. The door I've left open is the other kind, the kind that begins with her saying, simply, "I was wrong, Mum." If that day comes, I will be ready for it. I am not holding my breath. But I am not holding a grudge either. I have too much living to do. The book club meets every other Tuesday. Last week, Shirley brought a photograph she'd found at the back of a drawer, herself at 19. Standing in a Saskatchewan field, squinting into the sun. She set it at the center of our table while we talked, and none of us asked her to explain it. At the end of the evening, I picked it up and looked at her face in the photograph. Young, and already knowing something, the way some people do from the very start. She had no idea what was coming, I said. Shirley smiled. She had no idea, she agreed, but she got here eventually. I set the photo down gently. So did I.